A very warm welcome to Sunday Thoughts from Ardtray. I found this cartoon last week and it pictures John Newton, the writer of the hymn Amazing Grace, putting together the first draft of his hymn. He writes the words, "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound, that saved a wretch like my brother, who never does any of the dishes ever." Grace is one of those things that when we're on the receiving end of it, we actually become much more aware of our own need of it, and we're much less judgmental towards other people. Grace is a word that really sums up God giving good gifts to people who have never done anything to deserve them. God's love going out to the undeserving. And it is an amazing thing. And grace lies at the heart of all that Christians believe. This morning, I want to share some thoughts with you on my favourite parable or story that Jesus told about the kingdom of heaven. And it's a story that beautifully illustrates what grace is and the fact that some people aren't at all amazed by it and don't quite get it. First of all, though, some music. Almost 2 years ago, we met in this beautiful building at Ardtray for a remembrance concert. And among our list of special guests was Andrew Shilliday, a very talented local piper. Here he is playing his beautiful version of John Newton's hymn, Amazing Grace. Many thanks to all who give time week by week to do our readings and send greetings and play music and record and edit. This is a team effort. Here's Stephen with this morning's reading.
The reading is from Matthew chapter 20, beginning at the first verse. "The kingdom of heaven is like a master of a house who went out early in the morning to hire labourers for his vineyard. After agreeing with the labourers for a denarius a day, he sent them into his vineyard, and going out about the third hour, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace. And to them he said, 'You go into the vineyard too, and whatever is right I will give you.' So they went, going out again about the 6th hour, and the 9th hour he did the same. And about the 11th hour he went out and found others standing, and he said to them, 'Why do you stand here idle all day?' They said to him, 'Because no one has hired us.' He said to them, 'You go into the vineyard too.' And when evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, 'Call the labourers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last up to the first.' And when those hired about the 11th hour came, each of them received a denarius. Now when those hired first, they thought they would receive more, but each of them also received a denarius. And on receiving it, they grumbled at the master of the house, saying, These last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat. But he replied to one of them, Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give you this last worker as I give to you. I am not allowed to do what I choose with my belongings to me. Or do you begrudge me my generosity? So the last will be first, and the first last. Thanks be to God.
A few years ago, we holidayed in Tuscany in Italy, and it was a holiday to remember. Tuscany is famous for many things. Beautiful scenery with rolling hills, gorgeous, warm, soft summer Italian light, great food, good wine, and the best ice cream I've ever had. It was a heavenly place to holiday, and we were on a working vineyard who had been making wine for hundreds of years, and they currently make Chianti, one of the best known Italian wines. In Jesus' time, wine was one of those things that people commonly took with food. There was no Fanta. They didn't have lots of Coca-Colas to choose from. They didn't have the luxury of flavored water or carbonated water. But all around them there was soil, and there were grapes, and there were vineyards. So people made wine. So Jesus compares the kingdom of heaven to these fellows who were invited to work in a vineyard. And he begins the story by saying, the kingdom of heaven is like. So here we go then. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who owns a vineyard, who goes out early in the morning, about 6 o'clock, before it gets too warm. He finds people who are willing to work, and he agrees to pay them the going rate for a day's work. About 9 in the morning, he goes back out and finds some more people who are willing to work. He does the same at noon, the same at 3 p.m. And then when the day is almost done, about 5 in the evening, he goes back down to the marketplace, and still to his surprise, there are people who are looking for work. And the owner of the vineyard says, still no work? And they say no. And he says, well, there's only an hour or so left, but if you like, come and work in my vineyard. And they go off and they work for the remains of the day. When the day is done, the owner of the vineyard calls the manager and instructs him to pay the workers, but to start with the fellows who started at 5 in the evening. Now here's where the story gets really interesting. The fellows who started at tea time get a full day's pay. They can't believe their good fortune, and they go home delighted, surprised by generosity and surprised by grace. The fellows who'd been working all day long, and particularly those who'd been there from early morning, when they get their agreed daily rate of pay, they feel disappointed and let down. They grumbled and they complained, and they started giving off about how unfair this all was. And then the boss says to them, what's your problem? Can I not do whatever I want with what belongs to me? And then he asks them this really searching question, or are you envious because I'm generous? They didn't get grace, and they didn't like it when other people who hadn't worked as hard as them seemed to be treated equally. So Jesus tells this story to teach us a few things about the kingdom of heaven. First of all, the kingdom of heaven is always and will always be filled with surprises. It's not predictable. You can't describe it in neat formula. It will always be filled with delightful surprises. And if we ever think we totally understand it, and we have our heads around it, and we have everything sussed and neatly systematized, we've got it wrong. There are always more surprises waiting. All the stories that Jesus told about the kingdom of heaven have a surprise somewhere in the story. Sometimes there's a shock in the middle of the story. Sometimes people are delighted. At other times they're baffled. Sometimes they're angry. And it was mostly the religious types who got angry and got really miffed and took offense at these stories that Jesus told about this kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven will always be filled with surprises. And sometimes its values don't appear to make perfect sense. Or to put it another way, sometimes the mathematics don't quite add up. They didn't add up for the folks who started work at tea time and got a full day's pay. And equally, the mathematics didn't seem to add up to the fellows who worked early morning and also got a full day's pay. They would normally have been delighted, of course. But when they saw those who started late in the day get a full day's pay, they couldn't cope with grace and generosity because they thought they deserved more. So sometimes the values of the kingdom of heaven will appear inside out or upside down by our human standards. I suppose what the workers who had worked all day long expected was simple. They expected fairness. Fairness. And fairness is important. But think about this. The kingdom of heaven doesn't operate on principles of fairness, but rather on principles of grace and generosity. The kingdom of heaven offers love to the loveless, hope to the hopeless, forgiveness to the undeserving. It's an offer that appears almost too good to be true. It really is all about amazing grace. And here's point number 2. In the kingdom of heaven, grace and generosity rule the day. In the kingdom of heaven, God does not treat us as we deserve. He goes beyond fair. He shows grace. And that's the point of the parable. I suppose we have this notion that if we work hard at being nice, then God will give us access to heaven. We kind of earn our way in. And we compare ourselves quietly to other people so we look better. We have this unspoken idea maybe that if there's a queue when we get there, we're kind of hoping that maybe in front of us will be somebody like Saddam Hussein or Bin Laden or Hitler. And by comparison, we will look like saints. But what if you're in the queue and right in front of you, somebody like Billy Graham or Mother Teresa? Be thankful that God is not fair, that grace goes beyond fairness, that in Philip Yancey's famous words, there's nothing you can do to make God love you more, and there's nothing that you can do to make God love you less. I was speaking to one of our vestries years ago about this parable, and I put it to him that the main point in the parable is that God gives gifts. God doesn't give wages. That's the main point of the parable. He doesn't give you just what you deserve. The point of this parable, remember, is that God doesn't give wages. God gives gifts. And Paul wrote, the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life. That's it. Theologize all you want. It's simple, unexpected, upside down. But that's it from this parable. Put away notions of God giving you what you deserve. The whole point of the Christian story is that none of us would stand a chance if God gave us simply what we deserve. Last week, there was a paper on my desk from our house insurance company. The policy was due for renewal, and written in bold letters, so I got the point, were these words: we would remind you that there are no days of grace. In other words, if you don't pay your premium and your house catches fire or is flooded the following morning, the only thing you can expect is fairness. And if you didn't pay your premium, that's tough luck. In the world that we live in and mostly operate in terms of business, there are no days of grace. You get what you deserve. But Jesus told parables to show us that the kingdom of heaven is quite different. It's flooded with grace. Every day is a new day with opportunities given to us by God's grace, sent with love. He extends to all of us the invitation to follow Jesus, to trust him so we can be forgiven. I said quite a lot this morning in this short space, but if you remember only one thing, remember this, that God gives gifts and not wages. Thanks for listening. God bless you. Have a great week.